What's up guys, Lucky Locks here. Welcome back to another prediction video. This is going to be for PFL Challenger Series 3. We got women's lightweight this week. Somewhat of a new division in the MMA world. PFL kind of leading the charge when it does come to the women's lightweight scene. I guess you could say this is the premier women's lightweight division in MMA, considering they're, to my knowledge, the only major organization that does offer this, but it should be a pretty good card. The fact that this division is new does kind of mean that there isn't a really deep pool of potential participants here, so a lot of these fighters aren't super experienced yet in terms of being a professional MMA fighter, but definitely some interesting matchups that I'm excited to talk about. So without further ado, let's get right into the first one. The first fight on the card is between Michelle Montague and Olivia Parker. Montague is a 28-year-old fighter out of New Zealand. She had an 11-2 amateur career with a 91% finish rate. She's now making her pro debut here, and she came up on the IMMAF circuit, was an amateur world champion actually at lightweight. And you know, a lot of the fighters that will be on this card and that participate in the PFL lightweight division in general have been at 145 or even 135 before, just because not a lot of organizations offer this division, as I mentioned before. But she actually was a world champion at this weight, which I think is important to note. She also competed at 145 and did medal there in the world championships. She was an Oceania champ 2 times. As an amateur, was a 2-time Oceania wrestling champ, as well as a national New Zealand wrestling champ. And she represented New Zealand in wrestling internationally a few times, was the Oceania champ for Jiu-Jitsu, also a 4-time national Jiu-Jitsu champion in New Zealand for gi and no gi. Trains at City Kickboxing and Core MMA, and we have seen her at American Top Team in the past when she's been in the States. Striking-wise, she has a decent jab. She's responsible on defense. Under pressure against a good striker, though, she can be a little bit low volume, but obviously the grappling is where she really shines. She's really strong there. Excellent wrestling, excellent jiu-jitsu game, has 8 submissions as an amateur, lots of arm bars, and it's also a bonus that she's used to this weight class. You know, she was an amateur champion at 155, so having a look now at Parker, she just fought Kat Zingano on Bellator 256 about a year ago. She was a 5-0 amateur, turned pro, and went 4-0 against kind of lesser competition in Valor. They had a combined record of 3-9 between the 4 opponents. 2 of them were 0-0 and the other 2 had losing records, but she did have 3 finishes in that span, which is impressive, and that earned her a deserved step up on Invicta against Chelsea Chandler, who's a pretty good fighter, and Parker was choked out in the first round there. And then the fight after that gets, in my opinion, way too much of a step up in Kat Zingano, but probably got a nice paycheck there, but she was armbarred in the first round in that one. So she's a solid fighter. She fared quite well in the regionals and also on the amateur circuit, but she's been submitted in both of her pro losses. That's 2 fights in a row now. And Montague was a really good wrestler and really good submission grappler, and that could spell trouble for Parker in this one. She's 40 years old now, and I think this is going to be a stiff test against a good prospect in Montague, who is in her prime. I think Montague is going to be able to get Parker down, and that's kind of her world. I think she's able to use the wrestling and jiu-jitsu to get a submission in this fight, or maybe just win a convincing decision. But I'm going with Michelle Montague here. The line is pretty steep at this point, so I don't think I'm going to touch this one from a betting perspective. But purely from a prediction standpoint, give me Michelle Montague to win here. Second fight on the card, we have Julia Dorny versus Jeslen Mishelle. And Dorny started her martial arts journey in the discipline of judo, and she also came up similar to Montague on that IMMAF scene as an amateur. She was the world and European champ at women's 145. She's now 2-0 as a pro with 2 knockouts. And the level of the competition in those 2 professional bouts was pretty low, but still impressive. 100% finish rate in her first 2 fights. Last 3 amateur fights were all finishes as well. And some of the women she faced on that IMMAF scene might have actually been better than the fighters that she was facing as a pro thus far. She hasn't been in the cage since 2019, and in addition to being a fighter, she is a media scientist, a journalist, and a television presenter. She has a master's degree in media studies and has her own podcast that she started in 2020. She is a strong grappler, has that judo base, heavy top game, good ground and pound, and really, really solid amateur experience to back that up. Jeslen Mishelle, on the other hand, is a 5-0 amateur fighter. She was an amateur champion at 145 pounds. She's training at Syndicate MMA in Las Vegas. She said she's been getting some work in with Jenna Fabian and Laura Sanchez, her fellow PFL fighters, as well as Roxanne Modafferi, who I believe is a good friend of hers. She's also an actress and a pro wrestler, and I mean the entertainment kind, not like Team USA in a singlet, like someone else we'll talk about on this card later. But both of these women in this fight wear multiple hats outside of fighting, so, very impressive individuals to both of them. Mishelle had a good amateur run, and her last fight was about a year ago, and she looks like a pretty strong wrestler. She's strong in the clinch, gets to the underhooks, and pretty good top game on the ground as well, able to advance position. I know she does have some jiu-jitsu in her back pocket. I can only find a few fights of Michelle's to watch, but I thought she looked pretty good. She was a champion as an amateur after all. I think Dorny is going to be a different kind of challenge in my opinion. A world and European champion at 145 pounds as an amateur, and I think her base in judo is going to help her neutralize some of Michelle's wrestling. So I think I'm leaning towards Dorny to get the win in this one here. Next up, we have a fight that I personally am pretty interested to see. We have Jackie Cataline and Evelyn Martins. And Cataline is a Team USA wrestler coming over to MMA now at the age of 33. But in the wrestling world, she was a two-time national champ, Pan American champ. 2016, she finished third in the U.S. Olympic team trials, was the U.S. Open champ that year as well. And growing up, her dad owned a martial arts school when she was younger. She actually transitioned into wrestling in high school because obviously they don't do martial arts as a varsity sport in many high schools in the States, if any at all. But her brother has fought in MMA as a pro and an amateur. He fought on Gladiators Challenge, King of the Cage, and she's been training at Millennia alongside him and a lot of other really good MMA fighters that train there, but was always more focused on the wrestling side of things. Essentially, she's only been training kind of straight, focused MMA for 1 year now, but she thinks people are going to be surprised at her well-roundedness. Says she's not going to shy away, of course, from what she's good at, which is nice to hear because obviously she probably has a wrestling advantage over 99% of the women in MMA right now because she is a very, very highly credentialed wrestler. So striking wise, we kind of have no idea. We've never really seen it. She doesn't have any MMA fights, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say she's absolutely going to be the better wrestler here. The wrestling pedigree is about as good as it could possibly be, and she's also been competing in some jiu-jitsu tournaments, I believe, so definitely trying to shore up that kind of aspect of the grappling too. And apparently she doesn't have to cut weight to make 155, which is nice. She'll be comfortable at that weight. Now, talking about Evelyn Martins, she's an American top team product, only 19 years old, very young. She's 2-0 currently on Titan FC, which is a good regional show in Florida, and looks like a pretty good prospect so far. Cataline has been training martial arts for much of her life, but not training for MMA specifically, whereas we have Martins, who's been in the game since she was 12, grown up with the sport, started with the striking, moved to the jiu-jitsu, and was well equipped to go pro in mixed martial arts by 18. Striking wise, she probably will be the better striker. She's just had more experience, more repetition, more drilling with it. Pretty good leg kicks from her, nice long arms as well, hard straight shots. Sometimes she can be a little bit open for counter shots in the pocket. Seen her be caught down the middle a few times, caught with a teep up the middle to the head in her last fight in the first round. But I like the way she looks to extend her combinations. Doesn't seem to have the problem where she'll only throw singular strikes. She has some trip takedowns on her arsenal. Top game doesn't look super strong, but she did have a nice back take off of a trip in her last fight. Not sure she's going to look extremely strong in the grappling with Cataline here. But she's competed at 135 most of the time and gets the somewhat short notice call to come to Challenger Series at 155. So this is 2 weight classes up for her, whereas Cataline is more of a natural 155er, 145er at least. And you don't really want to be giving up too much size to a wrestler like Cataline. Martins is the taller woman here, however. She was decently big at 135 pounds as well, but I'm going with the wrestler here. I do think that Martins will have some striking upside, but at 155, that's 2 weight classes up. Like I said, the somewhat short notice against a really strong wrestler, the likes of whom she hasn't competed against thus far. I think Martins is a really promising prospect. I believe she has a lot of success ahead of her, I'm sure. I just think Cataline is going to get it done in this spot. I think the wrestling is going to be a little bit too much. This fight is around to pick him at the moment, with Cataline kind of as a slight favorite, even money favorite-ish spots. I locked her in at minus 125. I like that spot for Cataline here with the wrestling, but definitely could be a close match, and we don't really know too much what to expect out of Cataline in her first MMA fight, but I personally think she's going to have some success here, so I like her to win. The main event of this card will be contested between Martina Jindrova and Jacqueline Cavalcanti, And Jindrova is a multiple-time kickboxing champion. She started her MMA career 3-0, lost her last 2 fights, however. She's light on her feet. She's a good kickboxer. Decent clinch work, good knees to the body there, has shown some decent takedown defense as well, seems to be improving that over time, but stronger wrestlers and grapplers are still able to get her down. Doesn't have a great ground game, lost by neck crank in her last fight. Whenever she has wrestling success of her own, the top control and top game isn't excellent there, but it is pretty decent. Cavalcanti, on the other hand, is a 25-0 kickboxer. She's 2-0 in MMA. Still very young at 24. Also a great striker, undefeated in the kickboxing, as I mentioned. She's powerful straight shots, good hand speed. Looks pretty big as well. Great finishing instinct. I think she's the better athlete. I think she's a bit more aggressive. Both have good striking. I think Cavalcanti just has a little bit more of that X factor, in my opinion. Sitting close to a pick'em at the moment, might actually see Cavalcanti become the dog here. And I think the pick'em kind of makes sense. Jindrova definitely has the experience advantage, but I personally like the style of Cavalcanti here. Not a ton of tape on her. I mean, I could only find 1 fight to watch. She only has 2 MMA fights, so in terms of MMA experience, kind of similar to Jackie Cataline. We don't have a ton of it, but I just like the way she looks in the striking. I think she looks pretty big as well. Looks powerful. So I'm going to go with Cavalcanti to get the win here. And maybe if she flips to a dog, maybe I'll think about playing this one, but I feel like this is close. And Jindrova is very experienced, so I'm probably going to pass on this one betting-wise. But just for prediction, I'm going with Cavalcanti, the Portuguese fighter, to win this one. And that's going to do it for me for my PFL predictions. Thank you guys very much for tuning in for Challenger Series Week 3. Have some good fights on this card. Should be fun to watch. Best of luck this weekend. Whatever you choose to bet on, man. We got Titan. We got Cage Warriors. We got PFL. We got UFC. Should be a good weekend for MMA. Take care, everyone. I'll catch you on the next one.